Hello and welcome to another episode of Chats with Chip. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of Saga, the Small Agency Growth Alliance, and I am delighted to have with me one of my favorite guests, Lee McKnight, a.k.a. Lee McKnight from RSWU.
I'm back, and it's good to be back, Chip. Thanks for having me again. I love it. Like I have to, I did bring a little toy, eraser sushi that I will be nibbling on throughout the show.
It is.
I'm not ready. They literally are erasers, so I'm not.
Yeah, that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, but I did bring something to show you.
I can always count on you to have a prop of some kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Whenever you're on any of my shows. So hopefully people are watching this on video, and if you're listening to it, go back and watch the video because it's part of the entertainment that we have.
Absolutely.
In addition to entertainment, we're going to get into some substantive things here.
Yes.
And because Lee, you and RSW are really expert in business development topics, and you don't just opine, you actually go out and do research. You've done some research recently.
Yes.
And so we're going to talk about some of the findings from your latest survey.
Absolutely. No, and thank you. And we released this little bit of background. It's been about a month, but I think what's interesting is how evergreen a lot of these topics are staying. And we'll get into it, but we added a couple of new questions we found to be really interesting. And I think one of the things we talked about before we started was I should finish, shouldn't I? What we do is we survey agencies and marketers. This is one of the 3 survey reports we release over the year where marketers are included, and it's probably the most popular. Probably not surprised to hear, just in terms of hearing both kind of sides and where they play out, in the answers to some of these questions. So there's the setting the table there, and I think that survey went out end of November, early December.
Yeah, and I think that's really what does stand out about this is that you are looking at both sides, the client side and the agency side, which is relatively unique. I mean, folks like myself, I do a lot of research, but I tend to focus just on the agency side.
Sure.
And so being able to bring both pieces of it into the equation really, I think, has surfaced some interesting nuggets that are worth looking at.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we decided to start with some of the disconnects, which are always, it's a fun place to start. I think, and I know one of the ones that you'd mentioned specifically wanted to talk about out of the gate is that productization piece, which I'll try to say that over and over again. It won't happen. But just to set the table there, so 52.4% of agencies saying they sometimes productize their services, yet 65% of marketers still prefer customized services over productized solutions. So there's a gap in expectations. And I thought that 50% number maybe seemed a little high. I wanted to see what you thought, but definitely a gap there.
Yeah, I mean, the number does seem perhaps a little bit high. I think part of the challenge that you run into here is definitions, right? Because I would argue that the vast majority of agencies have productized their services over the years. When I go in and I look at the engagements that agencies have, it looks pretty similar from one client to the next.
Yeah.
And the pricing is pretty similar from one client to the next. So effectively, that is productizing. It's not doing it in a branded way where it's in your face. And so I think that some of this may come down to, is it overt productization or is it subtle productization?
Oh, that's great. I just wrote a post on this. I'm going to go update it because I hadn't really thought about that, because you're exactly right. I mean, if you look at performance marketers, SEO firms, I mean, these types of firms that have bundled, for lack of a better word, or productized services for quite a while, I think it's interesting because I had an agency principal email me, not one of our clients, but just that I happen to know, and a great firm, but and small to mid-sized firm. But it said, can you get like 10 minutes? Because what exactly do you mean by like productized services? I mean, how would we, a creative agency, we're not even thinking about that. And so I said, well, that's very interesting. And so we did have a little bit of a conversation about it. And he said, yeah, I don't think we want to do that. As a creative agency, I can see how, but it's interesting because you've got a lot of consultants and folks out there saying that this is the way it's going. This is the way professional services firms are also going, and I can see that as well. whether it's law firm or what have you. But it's interesting how I see a little pushback too in terms of creativity and that customization, and how are you going to do that year over year, or I should say month over month, when clients start to wanting you to get away from your nice little bundle or what you have, how you productize it, then what happens? And I think we know where that tends to go.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that, if you ask a client if they want something that is productized or customized, I mean, everybody's going to say customized, right?
Sure.
And it feels better. It feels like you're giving me better service. So I think we always need to be careful when we're doing these things, in thinking about how it's being heard on the other end. So same thing with, I'm a big advocate of paid discovery as a first step in agency-client relationships.
Okay.
However, I don't believe you should ever call it paid discovery with the client,
Right.
Because that
Fair.
it's off-putting, and so you need to have a different way to describe it. Same thing with productization. You don't necessarily need to say that here's our packaged product that we're selling you, but you do say, hey, we have a standard process that we use. It's absolutely customized to you. But it's like going into a restaurant and asking them to hold the pickles on the burger or something like that, right? You'll make adjustments, but even a creative firm, if you're doing logo design or web design, you've got a process that you follow. Every creative firm that I've ever worked with has a process that they follow. That is productization.
No, I do agree with you, but what I tend to see, and especially just even lately in like writing this post I just wrote, not to keep going back to that, but digging into it a little bit more, is that there does seem to be this push for, I like the way you put it again, for like the over productization.
Yes.
Where they are saying like, no, we have this package and we need to be doing this. And I hear many agencies over the past 3 months or so asking me and saying, well, this is our plan. We're productizing X and X. And it's not that those, who am I to say it's a bad idea without, we're just scratching the surface with them throwing that out there. But, and I'm not sure where exactly it's coming from, but there seems to be that push for over productization. See, I knew it.
Yep.
And, I'll be curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, and I suspect some of it depends on what clients you're trying to sell to, right? I mean, if you're selling to, Fortune 500, my guess is that they are going to be less receptive to the idea of an overtly productized offering, whereas if you're in the SME space, that's a lot less off-putting to someone like that, because that's probably how they're selling a lot of their stuff too these days.
Sure. No, I think it's right.
Well, let's move on to another topic. One of the ones that really jumped out at me was the question of clients paying for specific deliverables.
Right.
And those numbers have changed a little bit.
So we had 53% of marketers or clients now preferring paying for specific deliverables, up from just 5% in 2016, which I thought was very interesting. So it was 59% of agencies charge clients for deliverables instead of hours. 88% of clients prefer to pay for deliverables over hours. This is much more in your domain, Chip, I have to say, because we work somewhat with clients on pricing, but what's your take?
Yeah, I think this is the direction that a lot of professional services folks are generally moving, right? Which
makes sense.
Whether you call it paying for deliverables, you just call it fixed fee or things. People are generally moving away from hourly billing, time and materials, those kinds of approaches. In part because there are a lot of folks out there advocating value pricing, and I'm not going to go on my anti-value pricing rant because I think that it's just most people don't understand it, and most people are implementing it incorrectly. But I think that in general, clients like to know, what am I going to get for what I'm paying for? Honestly, it's generally good for the agency as well, because then there's a lot more certainty on their side. And so I think the hourly model is not necessarily gone, but headed out the door,
Yeah.
and really only useful when you have truly unpredictable projects, where you really, something like, say, crisis communications, where you have absolutely no idea what the bounds of the deliverables are going to be.
Yeah.
Because it's going to evolve. But if you're designing a logo, building a website, launching an ad campaign, all of these things are things that you can, generally speaking, put a fixed fee and tell the client what they're getting for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's directly relating to those tangible outputs, which,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Now, the trick is, if you're going to do that, please don't tell them the number of hours that it actually took to do it. Because I'm seeing this one not infrequently, where someone has a fixed fee for the deliverables, but then they still report to the client on how much time it took.
But they're being transparent, Chip.
No good comes from that.
No.
Don't do it.
That's very true.
If
No,
you
no,
ask for it,
100%.
just say no.
Right. Yeah, it's incalculable. No, but in all sincerity, right? No, it's not a good thing. Interesting. Okay.
So, I mean, I think overall on pricing, though, did you have other questions on pricing in there? I can't remember.
Well, I mean, I kind of want you to get into the value base a little bit, but if we're gonna go off on,
I'll go on my rant. So, look, here's the thing with value pricing. Most of the time, when someone says they do value pricing, they're just doing fixed fee for deliverables.
okay,
True value pricing really requires you to be almost a business analyst and to understand the exact value that a client will receive from the work that you're doing. But the problem is that most of the things that agencies do, it's not that easy, and the client can't give you a square answer. I mean, how many clients can you think of who could really help you pinpoint the value of a logo?
right?
I mean, it just and logos are one of the ones that always seem to come up in value pricing. Well, it's, yes, it only took me 3 seconds to do the swoosh for the Nike, but it's worth billions of dollars in revenue to them.
Yeah.
The vast majority of clients can't answer that question, so you can sit there and poke and prod at them and say, well, what would it be worth to you if we did this or that?
Yeah.
And to me, it's not a particularly useful way of spending your time. And I do agree that fixed fee is, generally speaking, a better way to go. But let's call it what it is. It's fixed fee. It's not value pricing.
Okay. No, I like the rant. Interesting. Okay. There's another disconnect that we talked about a little bit before we jumped on. I wanted to get into too while we're still there, and that's one that, and we talked that that maybe not a shock, but what's interesting to see is that we had 77% of agencies who are confident in staying ahead of trends. Marketer confidence dropped to 62. Now you may look at that initially and say, well, okay, and Lee, well, it's dropped 4 years in a row, and it's risen 4 years in a row for agencies and for marketers. And I think I like to bring that up. While maybe it's not as mind-blowing, it's important for agencies to realize, and it goes back to the order taker. And we've talked about this before, Chip, and where it's hard to do. You have to do the work. But I think if we continue to see these trends move apart, that's probably going to be an issue, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's
not probably, it is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most common reasons that clients give for ending an agency relationship is that they feel like the agency is no longer coming to them with fresh ideas, that they're just going through the motions. And
right.
And I think that that really is what's represented in part in this question and the results. I mean, it is particularly concerning to me. It's not surprising to me that there's disconnect.
No.
It is particularly concerning, though, that agencies seem to be deluding themselves into thinking that more and more they are in touch, and clients are feeling that they are less and less in touch.
Yes.
So the disconnect is one thing, but the fact that it's getting worse is certainly a concern. And I think there are a lot of reasons why agencies may look this way to clients.
Yeah.
One is they may actually be behind the times, right? I mean, it's possible because some agencies just get so busy and nose to the grindstone, just churning out stuff that they don't invest in professional development and R&D and give their staff time to work on those things. But it's also, I think, in part symptomatic of the fact that when agencies do bring new ideas to clients, the client often says, sure, let's do that, but they also don't say, and we'll pay more for it.
Yeah, right.
And so it just gets added on. So I know from a lot of the agency owners that I work with, they're a little bit timid in bringing these new ideas forward because they're afraid that they're going to be stuck with doing the work without getting any extra compensation.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, and you brought
It's the same thing in an office environment, right? I mean, how many times have you heard an employee say, well, I'm not going to suggest that to the boss because he's probably going to tell me I have to do it.
Yeah, right. And it plays into another question that we ask, and we've asked this for years, and that is asking agencies and marketers what they thought in terms of those trends. What's at the top, and not shockingly, of course it's AI, and right behind that is short form video, which I think, as an agency, you're going to have to get vested in both of those in some shape or form. Obviously, that could mean services, but it could also mean business development, which I would strongly suggest to agencies. I mean, I don't think so. A lot of them don't have the wherewithal to be as active as you are on social and on LinkedIn. I think that can be very hard for small and mid-sized firms. But just like the YouTube shorts, I mean, we went from doing my 3 takeaways videos that were 3 to 6 minutes, and our views were kind of going down, and I'm waiting for you to say, well, whose fault is that? But not because of the talent. I mean, the talent's there, obviously, but we really did see, for whatever reason, and we're rethinking that now, did we get 100 and something episodes and maybe it's just time for a different format or something like that? But then those YouTube shorts were an agency on their phone, which is what they want it's more the TikTok that's become everything, kind of those more raw, personal, shorter videos. There's never been a better time for an agency to get in there and create some of these. And it feels kind of weird sometimes, and it's different. And plus, I'm old, but our views skyrocketed comparatively on those shorts that we've done, and we're still kind of experimenting with it. And then with AI, good Lord, I mean, I find it helpful. I can speak a little bit to services on the agency side, but I did have one principal raving about this GPT he created that has cut his proposal creation time in half. I would love to see what those look like, given kind of what we know about AI so far, even though it's evolving exponentially. So I'm just throwing out a couple of those things there that I thought were interesting.
Absolutely. And look, I think that agencies ought to be using a lot of these new, or at least newer tools and platforms to help grow their own business. But frankly, it's a great way to learn. And so,
exactly.
Rather than experimenting on a client with AI or short form video or those kinds of things, experiment yourself with the agency. And so if it works, it's a twofer, right? You've generated business and you've learned how to do it so that you can now frame it more accurately to a client and go sell it to them so that hopefully they will pay you more for it. So absolutely. I mean, agencies need to be getting into all of these different things and figuring out how to use them. And to your specific point, I think AI is a perfect thing to help in doing proposal production. If you're going to do proposals, I would rather you didn't. I'm anti-proposal.
I don't think I knew that. Okay, interesting. I can guess why, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense because proposals are a way for the client or the prospect just to kind of put you off and say, just send me a proposal.
That's fair.
And there needs to be much more of a dialogue back and forth and have a meeting of the minds on what you're going to do and roughly what it's going to cost. And then go ahead and once you've got a sort of a handshake agreement that says if this works, if you can really do this for this price, we'll sign. Now, okay, go ahead and put together a statement of work, but don't do a proposal. I think.
Well, that's a fair point because I've seen the agencies default because they kind of either they're not comfortable enough or savvy enough or whatever the right phraseology is, where they just default to we'll just send over a proposal.
Yeah.
But then half the time they take 2 or 3 weeks to even send that over, which drives me absolutely nuts. That's a whole other episode, right? I mean, it's like, what are you doing?
If you're going to do them, you got to turn them around quick.
Got to turn them around quick, and that's also part of the problem is some of those they get so bespoke that you'll be up all night turning that around quickly.
Well, and the biggest problem is that too often they're done with very little actual information. How many proposals have you seen that an agency turns out after 1 or maybe 2 calls with a prospect? How can you put together any kind of decent proposal for a client based on that little information. You simply can't. You're guessing. And so I would rather you be having, more in-depth conversations with the prospect so that you can figure out, this is what we want to do, this is the direction we want to go, and here's roughly what it's going to cost, and then go from there. And you will waste a lot less time on your side, and you will waste the time of the prospects a lot less as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's tough to pin down those prospects sometimes to get that info that you need, but that's nothing new. So.
But if you can't pin them down when they're looking for a solution, imagine how hard it's going to be once they become a client. So that's something you need to factor into your pricing too, right? If you're chasing them when they've come to you or they've agreed to talk to you to solve one of their problems, it ain't going to get any better.
That's very true. And that's where the frustration begins to set in. Yeah, right?
Yeah. I mean, I will say at least your study did show that that RFPs seem to be less popular with agencies than in the past. So that, while I dislike the proposals, I really hate RFPs. So
I was going to say, different than RFPs, and I figured that's what you were going to say. But no, that was heartening. That was good. It was fewer high volume responses in 24 agencies just focusing on quality over quantity overall. As RFPs become less universal, with some opting out altogether, and those percentages kind of keep going up. So that is really good to see. That hamster wheel. Again, and we've talked about this before. Higher ed or some of the other CDDs, where you have to do it, every 3 years or whatever that is. But otherwise, that's anytime our own clients, agency clients or prospects. We are not here to chase RFPs for you, because why would you ever want that? We don't ignore them because some may actually be the right fit, but a shiver goes down your spine.
Yeah. I think that it's really encouraging for me to see it, because a lot of these things that we've talked about, RFPs, excessive proposal writing, these are symptoms of agency leaders who want to feel like they are doing something on the business development front, even if they aren't necessarily. Same thing with, redesigning your website or things like that.
Yeah.
You convince yourself that these are meaningful steps that will help grow the business, when really what you need to be doing is having meaningful conversations with actual people. And that is more likely to win you business than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. And interesting that you say that, because another piece of it, the top 4 ways that marketers find agencies. We ask that every year as far as business development goes. And by the way, if we want to get back to RFPs, but I always find it interesting. Well, you know what? It's not interesting, because we know what the number 1 is. It's referrals. No shock there. That will probably never change. And hey, referrals are great. But what has been steadily rising, at least over the past 4 years, is direct outreach, which is kind of interesting, because agencies hate to do that, or they're not good at it, or all of the above, or they just legitimately don't have time, or at least don't make the time. But I think it's 52% of agencies, I think it came in third at direct outreach. So, as a biz dev firm, it is good to see. And I think that while I think it's gotten progressively better. We talked about this over the last several months and a couple of quarters. Breaking through now is so different than even it was 5 years ago, in terms of you're talking about email deliverability or thing. And we have ops people that do that and know much more than I do, but it's tough. And so I think I especially can see for small and mid-sized firms, you're not going to have the budget for a lot of these platforms, and there's so many shiny things as well that we get the frustration. And thankfully we have people that are, and I'm part of that test a lot of those. But man, it's coming out of the woodwork. But it's good to see agencies still committing, at least slightly more than half to it.
Yeah. So, either from the study, or obviously direct outreach is very much in your wheelhouse for RSW. Are there any types of direct outreach that seem to be more effective? Is it more thought leadership driven? Is it just a straight up, hey, let's have a conversation about how we can help you? What are you seeing, or what does the study show as far as the kind of direct outreach that's most effective right now?
That's a good question. I think, and some of this is going to be more what we've seen. I think that, certainly just the mass email. We personally weren't really about that. Just God, I'm not going to give this mental image, but too late, kind of just vomiting that out, and you spray and pray. I've always been not a fan of that at all. And who is, having said that, many still try to go there, and I don't know how they don't get dinged and completely blocked, which they probably are. But I think what still holds true, and it's not just because we do it. I mean, we see it out there, is because you don't know where these folks live, your prospects. You have to be careful about only devoting yourself to one platform and or channel. Meaning, if you're just emailing away, I'm not saying that doesn't work, but the phone still works. I think the key there is making sure that if you can have some thought leadership in there, you almost have to these days, and it doesn't mean that you have this does not have to be your full-time job. And that is actually where AI does help. I think, going back to that for a second, there's nothing worse than, especially on LinkedIn, taking these shortcuts where they just have the AI spit out whatever gratuitous business cliche. And I've seen these agencies owners do this, and it's like, you can tell so quickly that's AI, and I don't know what are you getting out of that. But I think there are ways it can inform research. It can inform messaging in a way that maybe you hadn't thought about. Today, anyway, you should not take that directly and just pop it wherever or get it out to a prospect. But I've been trying to learn more just along the lines of prompts. And it gets so much deeper than I even realized. Even 2 weeks ago, I got in the Substack where I was like, oh my God, that's a huge prompt that I had no idea it got that complicated, for lack of a better word. And I learned a lot from it, actually. And so I think we'll see where that goes. But I think making sure with that outreach that you get more of that, it's going to take a little bit more time. But I think for small and mid-sized firms, if you're able to really target those prospects, and this might sound like, well, of course, Lee, but target those prospects so that you can have some of that personalized outreach, right. Ultimately get to those conversations that you're talking about, Chip, where you are able to show them specifically, this is how we can help you and solve this business challenge because our clients are doing it, versus the fluffy stuff that I think agencies have gotten better, but man, there's still a lot of it where, to your point, I mean, they all look alike in many ways. It's gotten better, but I think alternating those platforms and alternating those touches is one of the best ways to get in the door.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really important there, which is to make it personalized and real personalized, not using AI to fake personalize.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I've seen that go horribly wrong in my own inbox on a regular basis.
Right. It's not, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It's awful. And LinkedIn is terrible these days. It seems like every time I accept a connection request, it immediately is followed by a sales pitch.
Yeah.
And so it frankly has made me reluctant to accept LinkedIn connections in the way that I used to in the past. I really kind of have to know who you are now before I'm accepting it, even if you look like someone that I ought to be connected with, because I'm just tired of that, poke me in the eye with a sales pitch right away. And you've got to work on building relationships, and it's about quality, not quantity. I mean, as you said, spray and pray, vomiting it out. That's not the approach.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting, specifically to LinkedIn. I mean, it will be several weeks minimally and 2 or 3 touches with, part of my job is bringing agency clients on board before I ever even deign to connect with them, because I want them to at least have, there has to be some level of permission.
Yeah.
Where, to your point, we may not have built a relationship yet, literally, but they've opened an email or they've responded to something. It's like, okay, well, now that door's open and they don't have to accept it. But I most certainly then do not follow with any kind of pitch. It's, hey, thanks. It's usually something where I've done a little bit of homework and I'm bringing up something, either a newsletter I read that they put out or a post that they had, to at least show them, look, I'm doing a little bit of homework here. This is not just, here's why I'm reaching out. There's a reason for it.
Yep. Well, and you do a lot of things like this research, which acts as a great door opener to conversations.
Sure. Yeah.
And that is the right way to do it. And more agencies ought to be looking at those kinds of things. Frankly, even doing their own research. Does it require work? Absolutely. But you can learn a lot from it, and you can leverage it to build new relationships.
Are you seeing more of that with agencies you're interacting with?
I'm certainly seeing agencies doing more innovative things to try to build new connections.
Yeah.
So that might be putting on their own events, for example.
Yeah.
That showcase both their abilities, but also makes connections with people who might be likely prospects for them. I haven't seen as much on the original research side, which I think is really an untapped opportunity.
I agree.
It doesn't have to be a monumental piece of original research.
Right. Yeah.
But a little bit goes a long way.
It really does, and I feel like I've seen a little bit more, and how do I quantify that? But
Right.
I feel like just because that's what I'm doing day in and day out, and interacting with either agency websites or literally with them, but and I will make sure and compliment them, and not trying to blow smoke, but just say that, you don't know how, and you probably do because you're doing it, but how invaluable that can be. And to your point, does not have to be War and Peace or the treatise that tells us all something that we never found out, but a little bit does go a long way. And I think putting that into place, and the key, of course, is getting it in front of your prospects and making sure that, again, that the Kevin Costner, we build it and they will come, is not a thing. It certainly hasn't been for years. You've got to get it out there, and that's hard. But
you got to do something to stand out, because there is so much of this AI-generated garbage that's out there. And so, doing things like original research or events or webinars or those kinds of things are things that can't be replicated by AI. And so it's a way for you to stand out and really connect with the people that you're trying to talk with.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that's probably a good spot to wrap up this episode on, because we always try to stick to roughly 30 minutes. You and I have a really hard time with that, though, because we could really go on.
I'll make it hard for you, but...
If someone is interested in having a meaningful conversation with you, accessing this research, learning more about RSWUS and all the other great things that you do, where should they go, Lee?
Just our site is the best place to start. So rswus.com, and got a bunch of, all our resources are actually there. So absolutely. All at no cost.
Fantastic. Well, as always, you have been a great guest, and I look forward to having you back again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And I appreciate everybody who has listened all the way through here, and I look forward to having you back listening to another episode very soon. Thanks, everybody.